One of the most common things I see when I talk to MedTech founders is not enough of them really understand how healthcare has changed, is changing, and continues to evolve when it comes to the stuff like value-based purchasing, getting through the value analysis committee, the cost to develop and run clinical trials for your device, and getting it adopted, and getting your company funded, and the difficulties there, and how to leverage entrepreneurial support organizations. To get insights on all of that, I talked to Monica Vajani. She is a MedTech pro. She spent 10 years working at Abbott and Medtronic in electrophysiology. She now is the executive director for the MedTech Accelerator at mHUB in Chicago. She's an absolute wealth of knowledge. She's plugged in, she has the pulse. And for the people that stick around for this full episode, you're gonna learn how value-based care is reshaping medical device adoption and what you should do about it, why early stage MedTech funding is broken and how this model needs to change, the hidden economics killing healthcare efficiency, and what makes Chicago's MedTech ecosystem really awesome and really unique. She shares her insights, her unique perspective. We chop it up on accelerators, what they do well, what they do wrong, and I know you're gonna get a ton of value out of this episode. So without further ado, let's get into the pod. Monica, thank you so much for joining the pod today. Where do we find you today?
Hey, Spencer, thanks so much for having me on. I'm currently in my home office here in Chicago in the River North neighborhood. But yeah, I'll be heading to mHUB right after this.
Awesome. So you run mHUB and all the amazing stuff that mHUB does. But if you could, for the audience, give maybe like a little bit of background on kind of on yourself, but then mHUB, what you guys do, all the multifaceted value you provide for the ecosystem.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Monica Vajani. I run one of the programs at mHUB. We do many things there called the MedTech Accelerator. We're a venture-backed incubator in which we help fast-growing companies accelerate towards commercialization with the input of OEMs and a number of different entities that essentially help us pick the right companies. mHUB as a whole is the nation's leading independent hard tech and manufacturing innovation center. So essentially what we do is we support companies that are building physical products. We're headquartered in Chicago, and our mission is really to enable or accelerate innovation for solutions that impact humanity. And so this can be across all industries, but MedTech is really what I've focused on for most of my career. And so we do a number of different things to support entrepreneurs from all different types of backgrounds. And we have a really cool 80,000 square foot space here in the West Loop, which is a happening district. And I spent a lot of time there going to restaurants.
Yep.
But on me, I've been in healthcare for almost 2 decades, mostly in the medical device industry. Worked as a clinical cardiac rep for Abbott and Medtronic for about 10 years. Also took a couple strategy roles at CVS Health and the Global Healthcare Exchange, and also have worked at a couple incubators. So most recently, I've been at mHUB, and we just wrapped up our last accelerator for the MedTech cohort. It's our 3rd one that we've run, and we're going to be kicking off our next one this winter.
Yeah, that's so awesome. And I have a question later more about kind of the ecosystem and in Chicago and kind of all the different bits and pieces. But I'll start by saying Chicago has some of the best food. And like every time I get to go to a conference there, I'm like, yes, because I know that I'm going to like have some good eats and some good wine. There's some like really good spots.
That's right. Yeah, what was the last conference that brought you here?
Oh, what was it? So I think it was probably either like AORN, like the operating room nurses conference.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Maybe like AAGL or like a laparoscopy conference or something like that, I would guess.
Okay, that's pretty niche. Yeah, that makes sense.
Oh yeah, super neat. And this was all for like lapivation. So, general surgeon, like ASC, that one, AAGL, ACOG, obstetrics and gynecology, and then AORN. But AORN runs a really good conference, I'll say. Like nice. Conferences have become like shisty and like scammy, it almost feels like. Like you'll be on the exhibit floor and they're like, no coffee, like you get tap water, no ice. And like, you want to buy coffee, it's $19.
Yeah.
The food's horrible, right? But AORN does a really good job with kind of like, I guess like almost like exhibitor amenities and exhibitor relations and like, multiple people coming around. How's it been? How's the foot traffic? All that stuff.
Yeah. I feel like it's become much more about like what's the technology that's going to connect the relevant stakeholders there. So just had my boss, just go to LSI. And I think they've got probably one of the best partner apps that has been created. So yeah, it's a different game out there now. But yeah, we got lots of conferences going on all the time.
I know I need to get on that like more straight like MedTech LSI health circuit with the conferences. It's just I've got an 8-month-old and so travel's difficult. But
Yeah.
okay, enough small talk from me. So like you said, you spent a decade in clinical sales. Worked at a lot of different hospitals and health systems, et cetera. And I'm sure even 10 years ago, right, or 8 years ago, whenever purchasing decisions were like shifting pretty dramatically, right? How those decisions were made, who was making those decisions, the weight that they have. So like you kind of witnessed, I think, this transition probably pretty firsthand. The transition from like most expensive equals best to like value analysis committee demanding proof of outcomes. So like, what did that teach you about what really drives adoption in healthcare? Like, how has it changed, and kind of like, where do you think it is today?
Yeah, I think so first of all, I think you nailed that on the head in the sense that I pretty much like lived through the advent of value-based care. So I started in 2008, working in the cath lab, talking to a lot of physicians about, first of all, what they're going to use, why they're going to use it, and just witness the evolution of how decisions were driven or physician driven at first, but then ultimately, just involved a lot more people, I think with good intention to truly make this an objective process and to really think about the clinical evidence and the cost and the medical device as a function of the entire procedural cost, and really just getting people to think about all of these different factors that go into the procedural costs and reimbursement and whatnot. So I think what is interesting at this point is we're at an inflection point where if you zoom out to how hospitals get paid and how medical device companies fit into this mix, a lot of how hospitals get paid are from reimbursement driven by payers and essentially payers supporting hospitals by reimbursing doctors for the services that they have rendered. Now, value-based care is on this trend upwards where hospitals and providers as a whole, whether they're groups or whether it's the hospital itself, they're taking on more financial risk. So what does that mean? It means that they're saying to payers, we can manage the amount of money that you give us, or we'll take some incentives. It's a whole stepwise effect of of how much risk they can be taking on. But that doesn't extend to the medical device community. So when you are a medical device company, you are still selling your device based on the clinical evidence that exists. And what clinical evidence exists that you can publish is usually through a clinical trial. That could be 6 months ago, 1 year ago, 2 years ago.
Yep.
It's less about what's happening in real time. And so I think if you look at those factors, you've got people who are just kind of overwhelmed with how to make decisions. So even if it's value-based care, they're making decisions without a lot of know-how or understanding how to track outcomes in real time. There's no one to do that. And so they're really focusing a lot of their decisions on cost and, more simplistic things like vendor consolidation, substitutions and commodity type products versus what's net new and how does that really reduce costs or improve patient outcomes.
Yeah. I feel like with insurance payers too, like the financial risk element that you're talking about, like I haven't really even thought about like whether you're shared risk, shared savings, global capitation, like whatever payment model you have, like how there's like ancillary impacts to the device companies, or kind of like how they're not, how much they're a part of that system or not, in terms of like how they're affected by things like on the payment side. Like I understand that there's considerations on the purchasing side to some degree, but like the thing that I'm curious about, like with value analysis committees these days, like I know surgeons and physicians have like less power, less say, less sway than they used to. But like, I'm very curious, like hospital ownerships have been changing, consolidation, private equity group ownership, like they want to slash budgets, right? They want to get, hey, 1% margin's great. We want 4 or 5% margin now.
Yeah.
So they're going to cut budgets, right? Cut budgets, mix up service line offerings and try to boost revenue, right? And increase profit. So I'm curious if the materials management people and the purchasing managers and like ultimately some of the people on the value analysis committee are being compensated or bonused on coming in under budget?
Yeah, possible. I think, a lot of what so at my last company, the Global Healthcare Exchange, this is a procurement tool that 85% of the hospitals use to, essentially buy their med surge equipment. It's a whole exchange, and there's a bunch of clinical evidence tools that they have acquired along the way to help both materials management and supply chain executives and professionals make decisions on how they actually lower their budget. It's funny you say that. I think it's not necessarily an incentive, but I think it's more like we have to drop the budget by 10%. You figure out how to do it. And here are all the tools that you have to allow you for that.
Less carrot, more stick is what you're saying.
Yeah, yeah. And maybe there's maybe to be a little bit controversial, but I'm sure there's bonuses at the top, but it's definitely not happening, for people who are probably operating the equipment and trying to find the insights so that the decisions can be made about whether they're going to do vendor consolidation, how much that's going to save them if they move to a different substitution or like a substitute product. Is that really going to save them X amount? But to your point, you said about gross margins, it's one thing like to think about increasing your overall margins or really cutting costs. So it's definitely that the right hand is not always talking to the left hand. A lot of times in my previous role, we would talk to people in supply chain and they're like, oh, quality management, they do something else. Like we don't work with them. So it's like, well, if you're talking about buying and then they're talking about patient outcomes, like no one's really thinking about how you lower overall costs collectively.
Yep. No, for sure. And I've final point on this, and I'll get to the next question. But like, I also have I've seen this happen a couple times where like I think in a lot of people's heads, a lot of founders, people selling devices, like they think that like the value analysis committee meets to talk about it. Maybe the champion physician surgeon comes in and gives their spiel, whatever. And then at the end of that part of the meeting, there's a gavel that's banged and they say, we're buying it, right? Or we're not buying it, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like I've seen it get hung up in this, like, well, the value analysis committee meeting went good. There's not like a formal vote. It goes to the purchasing manager. It's on their desk. They ultimately are like, Marcus Aurelius here, like, right. And they can just, yes, they can do the thumbs down. But anyway, so I know that I believe this kind of wholeheartedly, but like the early stage model for funding medtech is like probably broken or broken. And that like I think this is my personal opinion here, but like medtech investing has become like almost overly financialized, and like I know that it's a financial exercise and activity, but like I do think it's lost some like patient focused ethos to some respect. And I'm kind of like, is that just like the nature of the beast? And it was like naive of me to ever think that there was, a patient focused ethos to it and that existed, but I feel like it used to exist a little bit more. But anyways, I'm curious, like what you think. Do you think the model is just going through a little bit of a downturn? Do you think it's broken? And what would a better model look like? What do you think needs to improve?
Yeah, we're in a weird spot with how many companies that are out there developing net new solutions, whether it's like digital health or an actual medical device. Like there's so much out there that you kind of have to think that there's going to be some consolidation, but then the people on the other side that are doing the consolidating are almost to the other end of the spectrum. It feels like the two sides are missing each other, and that's a shame. So and even in this role, like I've seen that I've turned into more of the person who's trying to poke holes into a company or a startup to say, here's why this is not going to work. And I think that's a huge problem with VC at the beginning. Like I can understand the factors that go into that, but I think that's where it's like, if you're totally viewing something on a financial basis, then you are going to look for holes versus look for ways to make this company successful.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just a cruddy feeling overall, like, trying to find ways to, for failure versus success. But there is something along the lines of like, I made this joke when we were going through the process of picking the last 8 to 10 companies that we took through the venture fund. And it's sort of like, there's so many companies out there. Like, what is it going to look like? You're going to have something on your head that's going to take your EEGs, and then your Apple Watch and then some other things that are going to take your blood pressure and all this stuff. Like we're not going to be walking around with 70 devices. So at some point there will be,
Yeah.
that would be a little bit odd, but I mean, it could be our future. So I do think like there's two sides of it, but that is also like a natural part of the market. So
Yeah.
I do think some of this happened in 2010s where, my old company, St. Jude Medical, was acquired from Abbott. That was like such a huge deal. And there was a couple other big acquisitions. So there is this trend, I would say, of companies getting really, really big. And then all of a sudden parts that are either divested or broken off because the innovation just isn't happening at that level. So I think we'll get to it, but it's just like a natural waxing and waning of the industry. And you have to get to these inflection points to get people to break off. And then know that like we're gonna bring this to market faster than you guys are, even if you have a competitive product. So that happens every now and then, but I do think we're in it. The other last thing I would say is like the hospitals are also, they're getting huge, and there's a ton of M&A that's happening at the hospital level. So it's like if you're a medical device company, you want to get really big so you can compete with these for market players in the industry with all of the products and solutions that they would need. So there's some interesting things, but I do believe at least we'll see some divestment and some branching out in the next 5 to 7 years.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think I would say late 2000 teens, like early 2020s, whatever, like there was so much like emphasis on like the entrepreneurial journey and creating entrepreneurs and all this stuff. And tech transfer offices letting people file IP on whatever. And then like, oh, I'm getting, grant funded incentives to work with entrepreneurs. Like if I tell them, no, this is a horrible idea, then like, I don't get to work with that. I don't get to log those hours. I don't get to provide that report to the state agency, and I get less funding. So I feel like there's like this tier of like 25% of these, medtech startups where it's like, you may be an awesome person and like I think you could be successful with something else, but not enough people told you no early on, and like this should have been killed in the crib long ago.
Yeah, I think I would also just add to that like there's a thinking or this assumption that to be an entrepreneur, like you have to run a company, and it's like you can be an entrepreneur in many different ways. You can contribute to a fast growing venture in lots of different ways. Being an entrepreneur does not mean like you have to take a company and raise funding and do all that. Like that's only a few people know how to do that. And even those people need luck. So I hope that, those people who aren't getting told no or are getting told no eventually just, for their own benefit. Like we have a lot of entrepreneurs at mHUB. And so, something I try to work towards is telling people to think about outcomes versus activity. So thank you, OKRs, for teaching me how to do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like you can throw out a bunch of activity, but if you're not really driving towards outcomes, then you have to reevaluate what you're doing.
We call that the illusion of progress at XO,
yes.
Right? No, I totally agree. Like, I mean, I meet through XO MedTech, like a bunch of early stage founders. And sometimes I'll just tell them like, hey, I don't know if this is going to be the thing that you take to the promised land. But what you can do is go through this initial journey with it, do the customer discovery, build the, lean canvas, do your research and understanding the regulatory, the patent, the landscape, predicate devices, testing requirements, manufacturing, all of this stuff, right? And basically spend little to no money, figure out if it's the right thing to make. And when you make that no-go decision, say it's a no, you are going to be so much better prepared for the next idea you have or the next thing. Because... and I'll tell people this a lot. I'm like, basically never is the very first idea or the first version of the first idea what makes someone successful, right? What they're successful with, what gets acquired, right? It's usually the Gen 3 device that gets acquired, right? How many companies pivot? So like, I try to layer it with that context of like, this is normal. Tell them their baby might be ugly. Not saying it is. But you should go talk to customers and you should like invest in the journey more so than being obsessed with the idea. Last point, and then on this like funding thing for me, I feel like there is a present and growing misalignment or kind of mismatch or ill fit between early stage companies, whether you're at the pre-seed or whether you're specifically in seed and seed plus or kind of like early series A, right? Pre-commercial, pre-FDA, between those companies and the stage they're at, the value they've created, the amount of capital that they need, the valuations they can get, right? And then on the other investor side, like the number of investors, what their expectations are, the capital supply on that side. Like
Yep.
I feel like it's just been hollowed out. The upheaval with grant funding did
Hmm.
nothing to help that. I think AI continues to suck the oxygen out of the room. We've talked about that. Venture capital's moving later stage, and angels, I think, are getting older. I don't think that like 45 to 55 range of angels is really kind of like filling in and like participating in angel activity as much as we really need them to right now for a
Yeah.
lot of reasons,
Yeah.
right? Cost of
Right.
living, etc. But anyways, it's just this multifactorial thing, and I'm thinking like, is there just like a different way to do this where it's like a fundamentally different model than like the, you do this and then you raise your seed and then you raise your Series A and you get clearance and then you raise your like, because it feels like I'm like more and more rarely seeing companies execute that well. I see a lot of crazy, awesome, valuable companies that are languishing, and it feels like there's just such a hyper focus on like a very finite number of device types.
Yeah.
Structural heart, neurovascular, peripheral vascular, neuromodulation, neuromonitoring, diagnostics. And if you're not one of those, you're fighting for 45% of all venture dollars in early stage med tech right now. You know what I mean? Which it's like 80% of the market's trying to fight for the same 40% of the capital.
Right. Yeah. So I think there's a couple stats that most companies need to hear. Like even just thinking about, we had JP Morgan come in the spring just to talk about what are the deals that have been done in the last 6 months. If you're just looking at the seed rounds, it's really just about the fact that like a lot of these companies that are getting funded are Series A or later. So then it's almost like a misinformation from the beginning. So there has to be, what I think would be really helpful is for any company that is raising a pre-seed or seed round, how many of those are actually successful in making it to market over the past 8 to 10
Yeah.
years. Pharma does this really well. They have it down to you have a 4% success rate if
Yep.
you
Yep.
are at this level. So sort of like we need to do the same thing for medical devices to say, here's what it's going to take for you to be as a class 3 medical device. Like how would you make it to market and how much money would you need to go through clinical trials? The reality is like no one has decided on like that cost because it used to be harbored by the big companies. VCs are starting to learn about it over the last 5 to 10 years. So it's just sort of like we have to kind of put in those amounts so that each company understands, hey, if you're going to try to do safety and efficacy for a 50 patient trial for this neurology device, it's probably going to cost you like $30 million. And I
Yeah.
can't say that that's going to be accurate every time because it's going to be dependent on the specialty and all these different factors. Give people some ballparks. I'm so glad you raised $5 million, but like you have 25 more to go. And if you want to get it acquired, they're probably going to make you go to a distributor before, and there's all these different factors that go into that. But at a minimum, we should be able to say, here's how much money it's going to take. Here's the percentage of chance or success for people in your type of role on how you're going to do that. So if you're thinking about acquisition, maybe open up some other opportunities of how you think this can actually get to market. Is it a licensing deal? Do you partner with other companies? Like what
Yeah.
ultimate goal? If your goal is to get it to patients as quickly as possible, maybe it's not to run this company as fast as the sole CEO.
Yeah.
And then the other factor would just be, given the funding environment, yeah, angels aren't stepping in the way they used or the way they could. VCs are going later. It's almost like people who are going to be successful have to go out and hire a fractional person to help fundraise. Like this is huge undertaking, and there are people who know how to do this. And I think like that's a valuable use of capital to get someone who has that Rolodex instead of you trying to do it yourself.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to disagree a little bit here, but on the fractional piece, because like, and I don't mean investment banker, because a lot of investment bankers
No,
won't touch
I
it
don't
if
mean
it's
that
like
either.
under 10 million. So just to like level set there, I know you didn't mean that either, but like I've seen like part-time CEOs or founder CEOs that are still surgeons, or even like, fractional CEO where like they're not quite full-time, but they will be full-time, like if they raise the money.
Yep.
I have seen that hamstring so many companies because the investors are like, well, when you're full time, we want to see full time, or like, we don't want a full time surgeon even though we'd say, well, we're going to hire a full-time CEO when we raise this round, that's not me. Like investors, when they hear like the founder has a full-time job and they're going to hire a different CEO, they're indexing on commercial and adoption risk so much that like saying that you're going to find, Mr. or Mrs. Right to run commercial operations and be the commercial CEO, and that person's going to be in charge of fundraising, so it's also an indication of financing risk, right? But
Yeah.
I've seen that be, I mean, maybe like if you've seen otherwise, I'd be curious, but like I've seen that be like a huge Achilles heel for some like really awesome, talented companies because they were trying to kind of go a fractional CEO route.
Yeah, I mean, I see both sides. I'm
Yeah.
not hard and fast on this. It's just more of
Yeah.
the other perspective is that people tend to hire someone who's going to be a part of the company, wear multiple hats, maybe is their COO along with the CEO, and then they're giving equity to that person and really, investing in this multi-year relationship that may not work out. Like there's so
Yeah.
many different factors that go into that. So I like the idea of a fractional because it lets you test someone out, assuming that they
Oh,
have
yeah.
the network, that they have the know-how, they have the playbook, and they're in the right place at the right time, and that you truly understand what this person is bringing to the table. So about a month ago, I'm planning for this next program and just trying to figure out how to kind of be the connector for some of these situations where I hear companies say they have a need. I'm trying to interpret what that need is. I have a bunch of people who are coming to me saying, hey, I can help with clinical trial research. I can help with
Yeah.
fundraising, do all this. So it's sort of like there's a lot of people out there who can offer part-time help, who have quick wins and success stories. There's companies who aren't willing to really hire on someone full-time or, sort of like are in that analysis paralysis region. So why not do someone part-time? There's clearly a marketplace for that.
Yeah, and let me be clear. I think what you're saying is the right model. I
Yeah.
think that having like one, maybe two full-time people and then like four or five really airtight regulatory consultant and a commercial focused person that's fundraising. I think that's a better model. It's a less expensive model. You get more diverse expertise, et cetera, versus like just having three full-time that have like more narrow experience. So
Yep.
like I prefer that model. I've just seen the investors be like,
Yeah.
like that was my point there. But I want to keep it moving. I know you've got a hard out in 15, so we'll do a little bit more like rapid fire for these last
Yeah.
questions. But
Sure.
so this keeps me up at night, right? Like hospital margins are getting squeezed, right? We talked about that a little bit. Device reimbursement and procedure reimbursements like flat or declining in a lot of cases.
Yep.
But insurance companies keep growing their revenues, right? I'm curious if what role you see insurance payers in the future. Like, where does this end? What role do these like insurance payers like really need to play? Because it feels like we're kind of like going to this point of like, this isn't going to work. Like it's going to hit a tipping point or it's like something's going to crash.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most interesting models are really where insurance. There's really no delineation between a provider and insurance. It's like everybody's working together. There's piles of money that have been set aside. The clinical decisions are done in conjunction with payers, so that way they're really at the table for what matters most. It's a tough thing. I do think there will be a tipping point, but for the foreseeable future, payers are still the entities that make the decisions on the actual reimbursement for providers. And that's how the economics work right now. I don't believe are going to change for the foreseeable.
Mm-hmm.
But what I do think device companies are getting better at doing is collecting data and making sense of that. And they're a huge portion of what we talk about the patient journey and outcomes for how people are doing in the home setting and things like that. So I think there's a huge opportunity to really close out really what the patient experience is for payers to understand that like it's all of the devices that they're wearing. And if you're not really taking that into account, then you really don't understand how that patient is doing.
Yeah.
I'll just end it with like the payers, like it's a dark business and like
Yeah.
how incentives work, especially for like keeping members on your plan. Like you really want to think about like who's going to stay in your plan long term. And
2.5 years is the average. People stay on a plan. People forget that.
Yeah. So there's just a lot of dark things when you think about as we get older, like how does that work with Medicare and all of that. So I do think that will continue to become more public. It will put payers on the defensive, or at least it will help them, I think, evolve to to really thinking their economics. But it's not going to be for the foreseeable future, like we saw with United and
Yeah, I want to show a graph and then like I'll give some commentary
yeah.
on the side here. So this may be some people will know this, some people it'll be shocking too. So this is the growth of physicians and administrators in the US. So this is like hospital administrative staff, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and if you track to like US healthcare spending as a percent of US GDP, it basically follows a very similar trend line, right? So what happened here,
Yep.
right? So
Mm-hmm.
there was the introduction of kind of the DRG CPT regime. There was a bunch of uh like basically requirements and regulations and different like frameworks and things that were planned
Uh-huh.
that really never went into effect in a full-throated way during the Clinton administration, but like everybody was gearing up so much for this like rollout of these things where they start this is what this like spike is here.
Oh
And
yeah, that
then
was the original VBC.
yes,
What's it called?
I
That's
forget the name.
the H. Yeah, H.
But
Yeah.
yeah, the point is like a lot of that didn't even go into place, right? But they didn't like ever kind of like trim that down. They just like kept growing and growing the administrative layer to this kind of like new threshold level, and then it kept on growing from there. So honestly, I'm sure the insurance companies wouldn't like this, but I feel like we're almost at a mutually assured destruction point. And one thing that I think that could be done to basically bilateral disarmament, whether it's CMS, whatever, like basically something gets passed that says for these 50% or 60% of care items, you are not allowed to require prior authorization at all. Cause like, I talked to my dermatologist the other day. He was like, I'll prescribe a topical ointment and I'll have to get prior authorization and they'll deny it and I have to appeal it.
Yeah.
And that takes staff and time and energy and cost and resources. And I'm thinking to myself, honestly, if you just said, look, like we're going to increase the penalties for fraud, right?
Yeah.
And like, over subscription, like the kind of the bad actors, we're going to over penalize them on the provider side, but we're going to say you're not allowed to request prior authorization. So that would focus their efforts on this glioblastoma drug or this type of thing, the things where it's really driving care and you really do need to some degree some prior authorization to really understand it and all that stuff, right? But like if you did that, think about how much administrative staff you would basically, I think, flatline, if not decrease the administrative staff layers within hospitals and care providers. And then on the insurance side, the same thing. I think they would literally save so much cost because those 60% of things that they're constantly reviewing and denying and appealing and processing, it would go down claims